Today we are talking about one of my least favorite words in fantasy hockey. That word is regression, and if you don't know what that means, basically we are identifying players that overperformed last season that are likely going to regress back to how they normally produce. We can use math and data to figure out who these players are. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. The first player we're going to be talking about is Brent Burns of the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, Brent Burns is lower on this list because he's still in a favorable situation on the Carolina Hurricanes. But if we're looking at the shooting percentage, it was the highest since the 2016-2017 season. That is going to regress. We also have to take his age into consideration, guys. He's 38 years old. Father time spares no one. We are likely going to see his production decrease year after year until he retires. That's just how it is, guys. I still think he has value in fantasy. He takes a lot of shots. He could be on that first power play unit. He's on the Carolina Hurricanes around some great talent, but 18 goals in 82 games last year is likely not going to happen again. I'm expecting him to score less than 15 goals and maybe less than 50 points as well. Next up, we have Dunn of the Seattle Kraken. This guy broke out last year on a very surprising Kraken team, but if we're looking at the numbers, the math tells us that he's likely going to regress. His shooting percentage last year was 9.4% compared to his career rate of 6.9. That will come back to normal. He's still in his prime at 26, so I do think he does have value in fantasy, but if you're looking at his stats compared to his career 82 game pace, this was a huge outlier season. The Kraken also run a very balanced power play. They run 2 units, and although Dunn did lead the Kraken in power play time at 2 minutes and 49 seconds per game, if we're comparing this to some of those other top NHL fantasy defensemen, it's a little bit lackluster. You might want to avoid Dunn in your upcoming drafts. Depending on his ADP, if he's going later, then sure, he's still a guy that has value, but I don't see him reproducing these type of numbers. Next up, we have Morrissey of the Winnipeg Jets, and obviously this guy completely broke out last year. The Jets were a surprising team. They definitely overperformed in my opinion. If you're comparing his career totals, his 82 game pace was 9 goals, 30 assists, and a total of 39 points, and last year in 78 games, he put up 16 goals and a total of 76 points, so definitely an outlier season for Morrissey. And another thing to consider is his shooting percentage, 9.3% compared to his 6.4% career rate. That is absolutely going to regress and come back to normal. Now, he still has value in fantasy drafts because he does take a lot of shots. He does put up a lot of blocks. He's a lock on that first power play unit on the Jets, surrounded by some great talent, Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers, and Mark Scheifele. I do have some concerns about the Jets, though. You've heard about Scheifele potentially getting moved, Hellebuck potentially getting moved. They no longer have Blake Wheeler and Pierre-Luc Dubois. They did add Velarde, who I am a fan of, but this is a different looking Jets team, and we do have to take that in consideration. I like Morrissey still. I think he has value, but I'm not expecting him to put up more than 65 points in this upcoming season. My personal prediction is 10 goals and around 55 points, and that is significantly lower than his totals last year. Next up, we have another Jets player, Mark Scheifele, and if you're looking at his 82 game pace compared to his season last year, he actually performed worse if we're talking about point totals, but his goal totals were inflated, and so was his shooting percentage, so I am expecting his goal total to go back down to normal. 42 goals, guys, that is pretty high. 20.4% shooting percentage is not sustainable. He has a career rate of 16.8. It's not the biggest drop off, but I expect him to be a 30 goal scorer and not a 40 goal scorer. Next up is Benn of the Dallas Stars, and listen, guys, I still like his role on the Stars. He is going to be on that first line power play with Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz, Miro Heiskanen, and Joe Pavelski. However, we do have to look at his stats and the data that shows that he is probably going to regress. His shooting percentage last year was 17.4% compared to his career rate of 13.2. Expect this to come down. He's also 34 years old, guys. He is past his prime, so I do think this was an outlier season for him. You never know. You do have guys like Joe Pavelski, who is 38 years old and still putting up fantastic numbers, but I have some concerns with Benn. If you're looking at the last couple of seasons too with Benn, he was terrible. He was not fantasy relevant whatsoever. I do think he still has value, but I'm expecting him to put up less than 30 goals and less than 70 points this upcoming year. Next up is Linus Ullmark of the Boston Bruins, and obviously if you're comparing his 2022-2023 stats to his career averages, this was absolutely an outlier. 1.89 goals against average and a 938 save percentage last season was incredible, but his career averages are a 2.50 goals against average and a 919 save percentage. I'm expecting this to come back to normal. They lost Bergeron and Krejci, their two best centers. That is going to affect them. They had the most points in NHL history last year, and that is not going to happen again. Ullmark cannot put up these type of numbers. You also have Jeremy Swayman there, who's a 1B goaltender, and if you're in a points league, that volume is not going to be there with Ullmark. That is why I will be be avoiding Ullmark in my fantasy drafts. Just not a huge fan. Next up is Erik Karlsson, who is now on the Anaheim Ducks, going from one of the best offensive teams in the NHL in the Lightning to one of the worst teams in the NHL in the Ducks is not a favorable situation. And despite all of that, if we're looking at the math alone, his shooting percentage is not sustainable. He had an 18.9% shooting percentage compared to a 12.5% career rate. That is going to come back down to normal. He is 33 years old as well. If we're looking at age curves, they are not too friendly to him. So guys, not a fan of Killorn in these upcoming drafts. I know last year he was great, but I'm expecting him to put up less than 50 points and probably less than 20 goals too. Not a huge fan, and I will not be drafting him at all in my upcoming fantasy drafts. Next up, we have McCann of the Seattle Kraken. And listen, he was great last year, right? The Kraken surprised a lot of people. McCann put up 40 goals in 79 games. The math tells us that he's likely going to regress though. Look at his shooting percentage, 19% last year compared to a 12.1% career rate. That is likely going to regress and come back to normal. If you're also looking at his 82 game pace, look at his career 82 game pace, 22 goals and 23 assists, a total of 45 points. And then look at last season, 40 goals, 30 assists, and a total of 70 points. Last year was an outlier season for McCann, and I don't know if he can replicate these type of numbers. We also have to consider that the Kraken run a very balanced offense. They run 3 lines, they run 2 power play units. There's no top-heavy time on ice totals for some of these players. Look at McCann's power play total last year, 2 minutes and 39 seconds per game of power play time. If we're comparing this to some other superstars in the NHL, this is very disappointing. Unless the Kraken change the way they run their offense, I am not expecting McCann to put up these type of numbers again. Definitely expect regression, and I'm probably avoiding him in all of my drafts. At number 3, we have Erik Karlsson of the Pittsburgh Penguins, a guy that I'm probably avoiding in a lot of my drafts because his ADP is pretty high. People expect him to still be one of the best fantasy defensemen in the NHL. However, if you're looking at the math, it says that he's likely going to regress. His shooting percentage last year was almost double his career rate. His shooting percentage was 11.9%. His career rate is 6.9%. Expect those goals to come back to normal. If you're comparing his stats last year to his career 82 game pace, it was such a huge outlier, guys. Do not expect him to put up these type of numbers. In my opinion, he's a guy that's going to put up 70 to 80 points. Still a lot of value, and that's if he plays a full season, right? Because we know he's pretty injury prone. But despite this being valuable, I don't know if it's going to be worth it at his ADP. He's going pretty high, especially on Yahoo right now, and there's not a lot of upside from his ADP on some platforms. So for that reason, I will be avoiding Karlsson, and like I said, I'm expecting major regression. At number 2, we have the guy in the thumbnail, Nugent-Hopkins, and I understand he's still in a favorable situation, but if we're looking at the numbers, it is very likely that he's going to regress. He put up 37 goals and a total of 104 points in 82 games last year. Such a huge outlier for him, and the Oilers had the best power play percentage in NHL history. They're still going to have probably the best power play in the league, but that is going to come down. That is not sustainable. If you're taking a look at his shooting percentage, it was 18.4% compared to his 12.2% career rate. Expect that to regress. He's also 30 years old. He's past his prime. It's not like he broke out due to his age. So that is another thing to consider when we're talking about regression. I do think he could still be a point per game player because he's on that power play. He's still going to rack up a ton of power play points. I don't know if he's worth drafting at his ADP. Yahoo, it's 33.7. That's a 3rd round pick for a guy that also doesn't put up a lot of shots, blocks, or hits. If you're in a league that values peripherals, he is a guy that's at a disadvantage. So you might want to avoid him in a points league. Now, if you're in a category league, he might be useful because his power play points is of the upper echelon of NHL players. So it just depends on your league settings. Personally, for the leagues that I'm in, I will be avoiding Nugent-Hopkins, and I think there's some better players that are going later than him in drafts. The number 1 regression candidate on this list is Andrei Kuzmenko of the Vancouver Canucks. And listen, guys, Kuzmenko is still in a favorable situation. He's going to be in the top 6. He's going to be on the first line power play unit. He's playing alongside Elias Pettersson. But if we're looking at his numbers, the math tells us that he is going to regress pretty heavily. Look at his shooting percentage, guys. 27.2% shooting percentage last season. That is insane. His shooting percentage was 3rd among all players with a minimum of 40 games played over the past 25 seasons. He also converted 36.8% of his shots on the power play, which was 1st among all players that took a minimum of 30 shots on the man advantage. That is crazy, guys. There is no way he can sustain this type of production. I do like Kuzmenko as a player, but guys, you can't expect him to put up these type of goals with his shot volume. Another issue with Kuzmenko is he doesn't put up a lot of hits or blocks, so if your league values those, he is going to disappoint, especially if we see major regression like I'm expecting him to. So I will likely be avoiding Kuzmenko in a lot of my drafts, and I suggest you do as well. Before you guys click off on this video, Also, check out my Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days. I just started posting a couple of weeks ago, and I'm trying to build that up. I do post some good content there, and I will continue to post content going into these upcoming drafts. So check that out. If you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button below. It really helps support the channel. Also, drop a like if you enjoyed this video. I will be posting a ton of videos in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. And like always, take care.